more detail on the scaffolding, what it created for us, and how it relates to the CRUD of a database, which you should know is create, read, update, and delete, or destroy, and versus the REST interface, which we talked about the first week, which deals with, what does REST stand for? Anybody remember? Something about routing is representational state transfer. It's a weird term that was, it's more of an academic term to deal with databases, but it lets us use the web requests to simulate the CRUD. And so this is a little chart I threw together to show the various routes versus the actions in the scaffolding that was created. So when we run rake routes, this is what we get, and these 7 actions here at the top are related to my recipes that I created using the scaffolding. So the second column is the verb name of the HTTP protocol that's used, and this is the URL that's requested. So a get verb versus /recipes without anything else relates to the recipe controller and the index action. The post, if I do a post to that same place, /recipes, then it's going to say create a new record in my recipe table. So, and etc. all the way down. I have 7 of these methods in my scaffolding, 7 routes. Those are the 7 RESTful routes that they talk about that let me generate the CRUD that I need to change and modify, look at a table in a database. So these go straight across. If I say get /recipes, I'm going to execute the index action. If I do a get /show, actually that's get that's actually wrong. I see that. It's get /recipes /ID. So this should have an ID on it. I was doing this real quick here. This should have a /ID at the end of it, right here. Get /show /ID. Actually, that's not right either. It should be, wow, this is bad. This should be get /recipes /ID. Get /recipes /ID. So if I go to my local host here, and I look at my recipes controller, recipes, get /recipes by itself should give me the index action in the recipe controller. So I have to fix this, obviously. That's wrong. Come on. And unfortunately, I created this on my Mac, so I can't fix it right now. There we go. So a get /recipes. So /recipes is the URL in the top. That gives me my index view, my index action in the recipes controller. And the index action goes through and lists all of the data in every row in my table. All right. If I go to get /recipes /ID, which is the show action. So if I put an ID here /1, it's going to go out and try to find an ID that a record in my table with a unique ID of 1. That's the Rails auto increment unique ID that is added to my table. I don't have a 1. I destroyed it. So let's look down here. You'll see. Remember last week I created links here. If I hover over this, my first recipe starts at 2 because I deleted the 1. So if I put /2 here, that goes to the show method, and it looks up the ID of 2 and gives me the detail page for a particular recipe. So that's 1 record from the database. and it lets me look at the detail of that page. So that's the get recipes/1. Now to create a new record, this actually takes two. So let's go back down to my read. I have finished the read part. The read has two of them. I can either do an index, which shows me all of the records, or a show, which shows me one of the records. Right? Those both correspond to the read. Any questions on that? The CRUD, the read of the CRUD part. So a create has two also, a new and a create. So to create a new recipe, I have to go to recipes/new. So if I look at this, if I go back to the top, my link that was actually created for me has a /recipes/new. And when I click that, you see the URL change. I'm going to recipes/new, and it shows me a form with data possibly inserted already for me, or possibly not. And I fill in these things, and I hit the Create Recipe button. The Create Recipe then goes to a new method called this create here. So I need a new, first of all, to create the form. And then when I post from that form, it actually does the creation and inserts that data into the database. Everybody see that? So it takes two methods to actually do the one creation. So the first one is the new, and the second one is the create. Down here I'm posting just to /recipes. All right? So that's using the verb post. So we have a create and a read, and I'll go through the actual code here in a minute. Then we have an update. An update means we're going to edit an existing record in the database. So the edit looks like this. I'm going to do a get on the recipes controller on a specific ID out of the database, and I'm going to append the word edit at the end of it so that I know that that goes to the edit action in my Rails code. So I first have to do an edit. So if I was going to be back here and look at the link edit on my Dave's Ribs, you'll see it says recipes/2/edit. So this URL here has the ID that I'm going to edit and then the word edit at the end of it. And that was all done with the HTTP verb get. So it goes and retrieves the data from the database, fills in some instance variables, shows me the same form that I would use for new, which is why the form is in a partial, which we'll talk about. And then when I hit update down here, it's going to call the update method. So the update method is going to be using the verb put /recipes/ID, whatever that number from the index, the record number is. So the problem is that put is not a verb in HTTP that is actually implemented by the browsers. They don't use that verb. So we'll look at the code and see how Rails gets around that, because they're very specific about using this RESTful type of interface. So they want to make sure we still use the put. So someday in the future, whenever the browsers support this verb, then it'll be easy for them to change. All right? So when I do a put, it's actually calling the update method in the Rails code, and it stores the new data into the database. And we saw some SQL commands last week that showed that, insert and update commands. So the last one is the delete. If I want to delete a recipe, I'm going to use the HTTP verb delete /recipes/ whatever the ID of the record is that I want to delete. And that's going to call the destroy method in my Rails code. So the delete has only one option. Again, delete is not implemented in an HTTP verb, so it uses another way around that to show that this is a delete. Oh. Because that's not a HTTP verb. These are actually defined in the protocol. They're just not implemented by the browsers. In here, I don't know. That's a good question.
That just seems confusing.
It is a little bit, yes. All right, any questions on that? We'll actually get into the code and follow this through a little more and actually show you the code that it's doing. So let's go to our code. And we'll go back to our log so we can see what's happening here. So if I go to the top, this scaffolding, this was generated by the scaffolding command. This is my recipes controller. And it says the first method here is using the get verb / recipes. So if I just go to get / recipes, it's going to call the index method of my controller. So the index method, what does it do? It first goes out like we did in our, like I made you do in our products. It goes and gets from the model, the recipe is the model, and it says call the method all on that, and which returns what? An array of recipes, absolutely. So at recipes, this instance variable contains an array of all of these recipes. And then it's going to use this respond to method, and what this does is it checks the format that you want to call it in and returns some data. Let's just see if we can return the JSON instead. And if I just go to / recipes here, it's calling the index method. You'll see in the database call, if I go back and look in the log, where is it? I don't see it. Here it is. There we go. So this is the SQL command that was actually executed against our database that said select recipes .star from recipes, which means give me every single row of my table and stuff it into this variable. All right. If I change the format, I can say .json, and it returns me the same data. It does the same request to the database, but it returns me different information. This is actually a JavaScript object notation is what JSON means. JavaScript object notation. So I can actually take this and assign it to a variable, and I basically have a variable .cost or a variable subcost in JavaScript, and I get back this. It's like an associative array in JavaScript. So I have a key and a value of all of the IDs and all of the columns in my database. Yes, very close to that. So JavaScript can take this and create a variable out of it in one statement. And JSON is used typically in AJAX calls or from server to server. A server might make a request of another server and say, give me JSON data back, and I'm going to take this data. It's easy to parse. It's a lot simpler than trying to get the HTML. If I put .html here, which is default, I'm going to get back the page, the actual text of the HTML in the browser. That's what the browser reads. But this is optional. By default, Rails knows if I don't have anything and the browser is requesting it, I'm going to give back HTML. All right? It used to be a default that I could say XML here as well, but it doesn't actually return anything anymore because there's no XML format there. And I didn't get a chance to try this. I should be able to do this. Let's see if that actually works. And if not, I'll figure it out for tomorrow. Okay, good. So this is XML, which is just looks a lot like HTML. It has open tags and closed tags, and it has attributes. And XML used to be the way you transfer data, and then a lot of times it's the same. It's used to transfer from server to server. But this is a lot harder to parse from a JavaScript program than the JSON object. So this has lost a little favor. This is a recipes record that contains multiple recipe singular records. So I have 3 records, and each recipe has these fields in it. So I can take this data. That's one way of exporting all of your database into an XML file. That's pretty cool. So that format lets me create my own types of formats if I wanted to and put them into my Rails code here. So once that's all done, this HTML takes over, and it calls the index.html.erb file with this variable, which is an array of recipe objects. So let's go to that method. This is the ERB file. And all it does is it prints out some HTML, and it starts a table, puts the names and some of all the columns in here. And then it loops through. Remember, the recipes is an array, so I can do array type stuff with it, array.each. And I do a singular recipe in my goalposts here. That retrieves one entire record at a time. So I'm looking at one record, and I can look at the fields of those records or the columns of those records by saying record.field name or column name. So then I can do anything I want with HTML here. I can take out rows if I want. I can add a link to an image. I can actually put the image in here, which I did. And then I have my links to my admin functions, which are my show, edit, and destroy. All right, so this is the HTML for that one method called index. So that's one way to read. That's one of the CRUD, the read methods. Any questions on that? Goes a little more detail about the code that's actually working here. Now, I can add more code here. I can do some more stuff if I want. Remember, this is just a scaffolding. This is just a basic way of looking at the code. You had a question? No? Comment?
Saying, looking at that, it's kind of scary that you could all probably write that on our own.
Yeah.
Without really a whole lot of help on that.
Yes, not a lot of code there. All right, so the show method is the second part of the reading, and this one wants to look at a specific record in the database, so it needs to know what record to look at. So it says get/recipes and then give me the ID of the record in the database. So what it does, it goes through and does a more specific search. Instead of finding all of the records in the database, it goes and does a find call on my recipe model, and it passes the params sub-ID. So this ID is the slash whatever here. So if I were to put, take out my XML /1, it's going to go and take 1 as the params ID, see ID equals 1, and try to look that up in my database. But it can't find it, so that's an error. So if I look at 2, that'll find it, goes and gets 1 record from the database. So if I look at the source, my HTML, my log stuff, my log, I can go back and see the select call that it made to my database, and it says select star from recipes where recipe.id equals whatever, and this is the a safer way of doing a select statement. So it puts the 2 in place of where the ID is asking for, in place of this question mark, so that you can't do SQL injection. That's a safer way of doing that. That says get me all the recipes who has an ID of 2, and limit 1 is just also a safer way, just in case your database somehow is corrupted and has 2 record 2s in it, which would be probably impossible, but highly improbable at least. You can find a way. So it uses that params, that's getting the data from the params hash for that particular element right here, the /1. So it fills up. Now, what type of variable is recipe? It's not an array because it found 1. It only found 1, so it's a recipe object. Recipe object. So again, I could do the JSON here and look at my one recipe. If I put .json on the end of this, I'm going to get the actual object of the single record that I have here. Or if I add my code here to do an XML, I can.
You need to change your recipes to this.
Yes, very good. Good catch. So if I do a .xml, it gives me the XML data of that record. So again, those are mostly used for AJAX calls, which we're not going to do yet. And it goes to the show .html.erb. If we're going to format HTML, we're going to go to the show.html.erb. If I just click this, this takes me to that individual view. And it has the notice up here that comes from the errors that I might have. And then it lays out every field in paragraphs. And again, this can all be edited. This is just simple HTML. I could delete some of these. I could add some of these. I could make my image tag actually go to an image, which I did last week, etc. I could format my cost to be better than just cost. So right now it looks like my cost is $19.99. Wouldn't that be better to be dollars? So what method would I use here? Yep, number to currency. And then recipe.cost. Yes, at recipe.cost. So now if I reload my page, my cost should have a $sign at the end of it. There you go. Look at that. So again, this is just HTML with some ERB sifted into the middle of it, and I can edit this however I want. Again, this is just the scaffolding. Gives you a basis to start from. If I want these all to be in divs, or I want to add classes to these and style these differently, I do that in this file.
Does the JSON pass like what kind of format?
No. No.
Just the XML?
It's purely strings.
I noticed that XML just tells me some data.
Yes. Yeah, XML has more formatting information. Right. All right. Any questions on the show method then? All right, so the show works good. Let's go on to creating a new one. Now remember that the new method needs two different, to create one, I need two different actual methods. I need to call the new method to start with. That creates information as a starting point for my form. And then when they fill out the form, it posts it back to the create method. So there are two of those involved in a new. The first one says, go and create me a new recipe object. So at recipe is what? A recipe object. It's an instance variable. And it's going to call the new view. So let's go look at the new. And the new only has this in it. It calls render underscore form. So if I look in my views, under my recipes here, what do I have in here that says form? Okay, it's a partial because it's got an underscore underneath it. Remember that? Partial form. So it uses this form for both an edit and a new. It uses this same file. So when it says render, this is the actual HTML code for laying out the form to create a new recipe. So remember we did a form tag. This time we have a model behind it. So we use a new method called form4, and we pass it the object of the data that we're going to create. All right. So this is a new recipe object that was created in the controller, and it uses that to lay out all these fields. So this is the error checking that we added to the application layout. So at this point, now that we have this one in here, you could take this out in our layout here, our application layout. We had our own error code where we laid out the flash and notice and the flash error. This is being done, inside of this form here. So this is where if there are any validation errors, this will display those validation errors. That's what this is for. So you can style this again however you like, add some classes or whatever. It already has one class in here for the ID error explanation, so you could take your CSS and just add some more styles to that existing ID in your style sheets. And it lays out all the messages. It loops through them and displays them one at a time from the validation code that you put in. And then it lays out each of the fields with a label and a text field. And it uses this F dot instead of what we were used to, a label tag we used. This uses F dot label because this gives us information. This form for loop here gives us information of each tag, each field in my column. So it uses that information and lays out a label and a name and all of this stuff. All right, so this is used for both an edit and a new method. And what's interesting is that if I edit this, since I got that close, look at the update button down here. It says update recipe. All right, so do you see anything in here that says update recipe? We have only a submit tag. All right. Do we see if I do a new, let's look at that same, it's using the same form partial, but it says create recipe. Isn't that interesting? So nothing in here says create. So the button changes based on how the partial is being called from what action in the controller is being called. It changes that in the magic behind the rails. Okay, we don't have to worry about that because it's being called from the right action. Isn't that nice? Before you had to modify that and do some other things. That's new in the later rails that we have. So this is the form that's laid out. And again, I can change the HTML, change these divs, change anything I want, lay them out differently, put a field set around it. All of that kind of stuff could be done in here. So when this happens, the new does a submit. So let's look at the HTML. This is my new form. If I look at the source, let's look at the code for my form. So here's the form code. Form action is /recipes. The method is post. So it's doing a post to the /recipes. So let's make sure that that looks right. When we do a create, it's going to post to /recipes. So that's correct. And it has some of those hidden fields again for the UTF-8 and the authenticity token, which we talked about earlier. Those are hidden behind the scenes to stop cross-site scripting, things like that. So here's our divs. We've got our recipe name. We've got our made by, and it's got divs over all of these. Got a text area in here. And then we have our made date. So it created this whole option tag, this select tag, with all the options and the years for me automatically.
But you can only go back for 5 years.
That's by default. It only goes back 5 years and forward 5 years. If you can change that, though, let's go look at the. We're not going to get through all this today.
Sorry.
It's all right. If I look at the let's see, the Ruby on Rails method for this date time select. This gives me some options of what I can do with this. Here we go, date time select, and I have some options that I can pass. I can tell it the starting year. So if I wanted to start further back than 5 years, I could do that. So if I modify this date time select, last made, and I add this option, starting year, I could make this 1900. All right, so then when I reload my page, yeah, it's grandma's recipe, exactly right. So if I reload this page, my 2012 should go all the way back to 1900. Probably not. I mean, you could change that. There's an ending, ends on, I think. End year. Yeah, there's a start year. There's an end year. I don't see it here though. Yeah, real soon, coming soon. All right, you can have this AM, PM is true or not. So there's lots of options I can make for this date time select. And it does that all for me. Isn't that nice? That's some black magic there. That's cool stuff. All right, so when I do the post, it goes to, we looked at that, it goes to what method in my Rails code? Oops. It goes to the create. So let's go back to my recipes controller. The new, it gets posted to the create. So this is what happens when I hit create a new one. It gets all the data from my recipe object from the params hash. So it gets all that data and it puts it into this new recipe object. So now my recipe object has all of this data right here. And then it does a save. Remember what we did in the model? When we created a new recipe, we said recipe.save, and it actually saved it to the database. At this point, this is the same method. And if that returns true, then it returns this information here, formats the data, and it says recipe was successfully created. If it's false, that means there was something wrong with that data. It didn't pass the validation, there was a field missing, something like that. Then it's going to say, go back to the new method and fill in those same data that I have using the recipe to make it sticky, but redisplay the form. So at this point, if I try to create it without anything, it's going to come back and show me all the errors that I have and fill in the stuff that I had submitted so far. So this is Dave, create recipe. So it left Dave in here, that's sticky. It's going through this loop right here. It's doing the else part here. Because save failed. Once it satisfies all of those validation errors, this save is going to pass, and it's going to come up with a recipe that was successfully created. So if I have put some stuff in here, serves is not a number, got to put a number in here. So it says recipe was successfully created. That's done in the notice flash sub notice. And in this case, it's displaying twice because I have it in my application layout and it has it in this show page. So what is this? Recipes/ID takes me to what method? The show, right? That is the detail page of what I just created. So if we look back at the show, it went and got the data from the database again, and it's listing out the data, and that's the notice. See, that notice is coming up twice? That's why. So you can take it out of one of those if you want. All right, any questions on that so far? I think we're, yes. Yeah. So, I didn't get your question then.
It wasn't a question.
It's showing, yeah.
So if you took out your old one, you wouldn't have that. It wouldn't show the errors for any of the other pages.
Right.
It would only show it on the recipes.
Right. So in this case, it might be better to take this one out because we're already showing that in our application page. All right. Okay. So we've done create and the read. Let's skip the update for now and let's just go through the destroy. The destroy lets me delete a page. So in my controller, we go down at the bottom. Here is our destroy or our delete method. This is calling the HTTP verb delete, giving it the model or the controller that I'm going to delete from, and the ID from the database that I'm going to delete. All right. So this says, find me the ID first of all. I have to go and get the ID from the database, so I know that it's there. And then I'm going to call the destroy method on that object that came back. Okay, so that's all that does. And then it comes back and returns back to my recipes URL, which is what? What method is that? These you're going to have to start to memorize. Recipes underscore URL here would be what? The index method of my recipes controller. All right? So that redirects me back to there and shows, because I've deleted it, what do you want to show next? Well, typically you're on that page already. You just want to redisplay all the records that weren't there, that are still in your database. So let's go look at and see what happens here.
So is this only delete one record at a time?
Yes, one record at a time. So if I hit destroy on my last one that I did, you look at the URL down below, it says /recipes/5. But let's look at the actual code. Remember, there is no delete method. So if I look at one of these, this is the URL. And it's having this data confirm, which calls some JavaScript, and this data method, which is the delete. So that Rails knows that this is a delete. This comes in through this URL, and Rails then knows that it's a delete. It calls the right method in my controller. But this is a new way of doing JavaScript. It has some JavaScript code that's being loaded by your page at the top. All of this jQuery here, those are using the delete methods that are written for you. So if I try to click destroy, it should come up with an alert dialog box. Are you sure you want to destroy this? If it doesn't, then you have a problem with your JavaScript not being loaded correctly, or you copy the jQuery from your HTML5 template into the assets folder instead of using Rails version of that. So it says, are you sure? If I hit OK, it's going to go and actually delete it. If I hit cancel, it comes back and just stays the same. So if I hit destroy, it's going to actually go out and call that method. And let's look at my code here, my log file. And see, go backwards until I see it. Okay, so it found the recipe and got the recipe that I want, and then it's going to do a destroy on the database. So this is the one. It found one recipe using the ID. Then it does a delete from recipes where recipe ID equals 5. And then it commits the transaction. So this is the SQL that was generated by that one destroy command. All right. So that one's fairly easy to see. Any questions on that one?
Can we change the text to eradicate?
Yeah, you can. And again, that's just HTML. You can do anything you want with that. That would be, where would that be? In my index page. Very good. So if I go to my index ERB here and I want to change it, this is the body. I could put eradicate. right? And if I reload that page, these all say eradicate. Look at that. Isn't that easy? Easy stuff. So that's enough for today. Tomorrow we'll go through the last edit and update and start looking at how we can populate some data into these automatically.